Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jenna May from Business Review, and I'll be your host. It is our pleasure to have LTS with us today, who will be presenting this webinar titled Oral Thin Films, Tailoring Therapy Need. Today's guest speaker is Dr. Marco Emgenbroich, Corporate Senior Director and Head of Pharmaceutical Development. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar platform on 24. You'll notice that this webinar is browser-based, so if you do disconnect for any reason, please just click on the link that you received via email to rejoin the session. In order to ask questions, you can send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of the screen and click submit. Towards the end, we'll allocate some time to address any questions or thoughts that you may have had. And please use the yellow help widget if you require any assistance, and you can move, resize, and maximize any of the windows in front of you to get a better view. But for now, please allow me to welcome Marco.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jenna May, and welcome from my end as well to join our webinar today. Before we dive into the actual discussion about oral thin films, I would like to give you an introduction about LTS. So LTS is the abbreviation for Lohmann Therapy Systems, and we are pretty well known in the area of transdermal therapeutic systems. And also LTS was one of the pioneers in the field of oral thin films, the topic which we like to talk about today. The headquarters of LTS is in Germany, somewhere in the Midwest, so to say, between Frankfurt and Cologne at the River Rhine. And here we produce in Germany the majority of our products for the global market. We also have a U.S. subsidiary in New Jersey, in West Cornwall, about 30 minutes west from Manhattan. And in West Cornwall, we mainly produce the products for the U.S. market as well. On both sides of the Atlantic, we can rely on the same core equipment to produce the transdermals and oral thin films. And overall, we can offer the largest manufacturing capacity for oral thin films on a global basis. So before, and then let's say additionally as well, we have an office in China, not to forget that, mainly for our business colleagues to be in closer contact to our Asian partners. So before we dive into the details around our thin film technologies and what we would like to offer to you, we're going to have a poll question at the beginning to know more about your background. Jenna May?
Excellent, thank you. So the poll question is, do you or does your company have any experience in transmucosal drug delivery? If yes, which kind of products do you have? So you have a variety of options here. You've got yes, transmucosal sprays, and then you have yes, transmucosal lozenges, then you have yes, transmucosal films, and then you have yes, others. Your penultimate one is no, but sublingual tablets, and the last option is no. So to submit your answer, all you need to do is select your chosen option and then click submit. You might have to scroll to the bottom to do that, and we'll just review the answers in a second. What are you expecting to see here, Marco?
I mean, from our perspective, we would like to know the background of the people attending in our audience today. If they already have thought about transmucosal drug delivery or maybe coming back only from oral point of view. And I think compared to the webinars we have given today, a few years ago compared to today, we were interested if you see a difference and change in the interest. Because based on our experience from the market of the last years, we have seen an increasing interest also in oral thin film technologies. Companies are more and more focused in these delivery forms, and yeah, that's what we'd like to see today.
Excellent. So we've had quite a few submissions, so we'll just have a look at what's been voted on. There we go.
Okay. So actually very interesting. So a lot of people have no background experience in transmucosal drug delivery. So I hope that we might be able to convince them. So in the future, there will be some more interest in their dosage forms. And as I've seen, of course, a lot of people already have background in films. And welcome to you as well. Maybe you learned something new today. So now let's dive into the oral thin films, and let me give you a quick introduction around these dosage forms. So OTFs, as we abbreviate them, is for us an still innovative approach for oral drug administration. So it's an edible dosage forms, and the API uptake is supposed to be through the oral mucosa. There's no extra water needed to apply this dosage form, so very convenient for the patients, and therefore ideal for patients with difficulties to swallow. As you see here in the picture, one of the pioneer product, actually a consumer product, was the Listerine pocket packs, which are still produced at LTS for the US market. So this is, of course, a non-API containing example, but a lot of people have already seen or tried it, and this gives an example how all thin films might work and how the taste would be in the mouth. If we go to the advantages of all thin films, we're looking at the pharmacokinetic profiles and absorption kinetics we can modulate with all thin films. So not just we can be Cmax focused, so to have a faster onset of action, which is very often possible, but also we can modulate the PK profile to be a bit more AUC focused, for example, to avoid side effects by a high Cmax, and therefore also very often achieve an improved bioavailability. Another advantage is the possibility to avoid hepatic first pass effects due to the oral mucosa uptake. We can reduce bioavailability for drugs with food effects, and for patients, since there is no water needed and no differences in the application, we think and we have seen we can improve the compliance especially. So as said before, it's a great opportunity to be applied in pediatric and geriatric populations. So our thin film components are usually a very long list in the formulation. But all these different formulation types, the components, the excipients, have a distinct feature. And the first thing is the film-forming polymers or polymer blends, mainly water-soluble polymers. One of the most used example is HPMC. The film designs can be either single or multi-layer, with different layers having different functions. To achieve the right film properties, we have to add plasticizers or fillers in order to make the film stable, not sticky, for example. And since most APIs do not come with a great taste, so very often are bitter, etc., and there have to be taste masking agents being added, or flavors or sweeteners. Of course, just to fill up the list of excipients, stabilizers are also very important, and also we can add buffer substances in order to create a local pH in the oral cavity, which improves the absorption as well. Very often the films also contain colorants. It could be to cover the color of the API. It could be in OTC products to get along with the taste, for example. So cherry flavor has a red color, for example. Or if you have a multi-layer design, that the different layers come with different colors, so the patient knows how to apply the film appropriately. We are distinguishing between three types of oral thin films in general. So number one is the fast disintegrating film. We also call them flash wafers. The number two is a more slower disintegrating film, so-called Meltaway films. And number three is slow or non-disintegrating buccal films, also called as buccal patches. So let's start with the fast disintegrating films. These are mainly consisting of single layers, pretty thin, made out of soluble hydrophilic polymers. And the API drugs are either dissolved in these films or suspended or in a emulsified inner phase. These films disintegrate within seconds. We try to achieve this in less than 10 seconds to have really a fast onset of action. And the very important is over the last year is the good mouth feeling. So when the all thin films have been launched, a lot of examples also hit the market where the mouth feeling was not well tolerated by the patients. And this is a topic which I would like to talk about later on in this webinar. We focus on the last years. The fast disintegrating films, they can achieve a rapid onset of action, mainly via the oral mucosal absorption of the drug. This can be achieved while the film is applied buccally, sublingually, or even by just a lingual application. It really depends on the permeability of the drug. But also going by the fast disintegrating film, we can achieve just another oral application, basically, with the absorption through the GI tract, when the API is not very good water soluble, for example, and it's just suspended in the film, and this can be just achieved by a lingual application as well. When we go to the Meltaway films, the main difference is that these are mainly applied buccally in the buccal cavity, and they dissolve within several minutes, let's say 5 to 30 minutes approximately. They can also consist of single or even multi-layer films, also soluble polymers, but these polymers, mainly, for example, due to molecular weight or their chemical properties, they are dissolved much slower than the fast disintegrating films. One key element with the Meltaway film is that we're creating buccally a mucoadhesive gel. This is formed and then spread in the oral cavity, and it adheres to the buccal sheet and the gingiva, and therefore we can achieve an increased surface area where the API can be permeated through the mucosa. The third type of oral thin films are slow or non-disintegrating buccal films, buccal patches. Mainly they consist of multi-layer films. They are a combination of a soluble, very often the mucoadhesive layer, and the less soluble or insoluble polymer film as like a backing layer, so to say, preventing the API being released to the oral cavity. So the API should only be released with the buccal containing or contacting film layer to the gingiva or the buccal sheet directly. So we are delivering the API via constant surface areas, really like a patch, but of course the time where this is applied is not comparable with the transdermal systems. We're talking here anything in the lower hour range on tops, if it's possible at all. So these three types of our thin films, they end up in different types of plasma profiles which we can achieve, which we can tailor and modulate as it's needed for the API and for the indication. So the first one, the fast integrating film, is tailoring a short Tmax, a high Cmax, really fast onset of action for episodic treatment to have the patient as quick as possible in the medication. The second type, the Meltaway films, are really trying to reduce the Cmax very often, as said before, to eliminate side effects, for example, and really focusing on the improved bioavailability, so it's a bit more prolonged pharmacokinetic profile. And the third, non-disintegrating buccal films, is really more constant delivery to the area, as mentioned before, over a certain time period. So now let's go to the manufacturing, which is a pretty different approach than the manufacturing of tablets, for example. Depending where you're coming from, the film production in a pharma environment is pretty unique. So we are separating the manufacturing process in four distinct unit operations. Number one is mass preparation. Number two, coating and drying. Number three, slitting. And number four, cutting and pouching. And I would like to go through these four steps in more depth within the next slides. So let's start with mass preparation. So it can be as easy as it looks here, starting with the vessels, which can contain batch sizes between 100 and 800 kilograms, even be larger if possible. For example, sometimes we're looking at a few thousand kilograms, which we have produced. We can add just all the raw materials, polymers, flavors, solvents, etc., within this vessel and just mix it, if it's to achieve a homogeneous polymer solution. But very often this easy approach is not applicable, since we're talking about dispersions or homogeneously distributed emulsions, where we have to stabilize the emulsion, the two-phase system within the mass preparation process. So this could be as easy as here, but most likely it's a bit more complicated. But at the end, we're ending up with a polymer mass in a transfer vessel, which is then brought to the next step, to the coating step. So here we have exemplary a mid-size coater at LTS, having 5 drying zones. On the top you see that. And we bring the drug-containing adhesive mass around the coating head. We transfer the mass into the coating head. Here it's a 2-roll coater. And we coat onto a process or intermediate liner through the coating head, and the mass is transferred into the drying channels. It's dried, for example, from top, just with an air stream. It's like an air fan. And at the end of the drying zone, the dried adhesive mass is coming out, and here is laminated onto itself just by winding up into master rolls. They can have a length of several hundred meters. And these master rolls are then transferred further to the next unit operation. And then we go to slitting there, where the master rolls are slit by scissor-type knives into narrow rolls. And these narrow rolls are already predetermining the width of the future product. And these narrow rolls can be easily stored as an intermediate in a controlled way, and before they are then further converted into the finished product. So the last step, the conversion step, is where we are, let's say, make the single finished product out of it. So we start with unwinding of the narrow rolls. Here they are slit into several lines, several rows of individual film stripes, and they are cut at the next step and then transferred into the packaging material, and afterwards these different pouches are individualized just by cutting, for example, here, and packaged in a bulk container at the end. Here we are packaging each individual film in one single pouch. As you can see here in the picture on the upper right, there's one film strip in one pouch, one sachet at the end of the day. So far, this is not really new in the area of oral thin films, and now we would like to introduce new technologies, new concepts for the oral thin film products. And we'd like to offer you now, first time, a new type of technologies which we can offer is the foam OTF. So it's an innovative new technology to make oral thin films, which have certain key elements of advantages where the oral thin films so far really suffered from. As you can see also in the picture, these films have a very high mechanical stress resistance. So you can fold them, you can bend them, they're not brittle, they don't break. They comprise a very optimal mouth feeling, and they don't form a gel on the tongue, for example, like HPMC is doing, where it really feels that having a strange, odd feeling in the mouth, and it takes not just the 5 to 10 seconds for the film to dissolve, but also a much longer time for the gel to finally dissolve and being swallowed. So this is something we really look at to get an improved mouth feeling. Also, due to the properties of the foam OTF, we can achieve a higher drug loading compared to other very thin, just polymer films. So the key advantages of the foam OTFs are really the soft touch, the soft feeling. They are not sticky, so it really has a different feeling, and so basically they melt in your mouth and not in your hand. They have a very soft mouth feeling. There is no sharp edges, although even with a square foam OTF, it really is, you're not damaging your oral cavity, the mouth, like with some other OTFs, which really feel like a plastic film, so to say. And they're also much more flexible in the oral cavity, and they adjust to the oral cavity, which makes especially the sublingual application much more easy. And for example, as you see here in the picture, also we can easily create these U-form shapes for the sublingual area to have a smooth application and adjustment to this area there. Looking at the formulation and the processing, due to this foam OTF, as you can see here left in the picture, we increasing the surface area of the film significantly by creating these foams. And this allows us within the formulation to use a much broader choice of variability of polymers which can be used here. So these polymer films usually would take significantly longer to dissolve and disintegrate, several minutes. And by creating the foam OTF out of it, we can bring this dissolution times or disintegration times down to less than 10 seconds. As said before, so the mechanical stability and the robustness is also very helpful in different areas. So number one, it's much more easy to process them, especially cutting, slitting is not causing any problem, for example, like with films which are too brittle. Or some films are just too soft, like chewing gum, which is basically not possible to cut them. It's very difficult to get the right dosing. The foam wafers are also very stable at different humidity levels. So especially HPMC has a problem. You can either formulate it too dry, so then you have a real brittle product. it's really breaking also in your hand, and sometimes patients might not even have the right dose in their hand. Or on the other hand, if the formulation is too soft, patients have significant problems to remove the film from the pouch, and this is much more improved here with the foam OTF. Also in terms of sizing, since it's a bit thicker than a normal just 100 micron or thin film, it's easier to handle. So even small sizes for low doses or for children are easier to achieve. So due to this foam structure, we have the opportunity to tailor the properties of the film very nicely, so we can have fast disintegration times, like the flash wafers I mentioned before, within the range of seconds. But we also can create Meltaway films, which disintegrate within minutes or several minutes or longer, by the design of the foam or the thickness of the foam and the use of the polymers, of course. Due to this, the foam characteristics, we can also have high particle loading and still achieving a good mouth feeling. Maybe some of you think back of products, OTC products, which have been in the markets, especially in the US in the 2000s, which having resonates, so solid ion exchange resins for taste masking purposes. And these films really felt like having a sandpaper in the mouth, and this could significantly be improved by going to foam OTF. So by this particle loading, we can also offer certain combinations with novel microparticle technologies, where the API is formulated in these new particle technologies as well, to achieve additional properties which a normal film would not be able to deliver. Additionally, besides the foam OTF, we also have developed new options, especially when looking at the process technology. So we're now offering a new technology of creating and producing multi-layer films. So we can easily now combine different layers with different functions, and we do this during the processing. Before, it was pretty difficult to have multi-layer coating on top of each other, since these films itself are not sticky, so you cannot simply laminate them to each other. So we have developed a new technology. We can have really multiple layers on top of each other. There's no limit actually, just a physical limit that these films would not dissolve anymore. But so we can achieve formulations where we can have, for example, a mucoadhesive layer combined with a slow eroding backing. We can have API combinations. We can add flavor components in different layers than the API. So this is basically just limited by your own ideas, your own imaginations, and we are happy to explore your ideas on how using this multi-layer options. So now, moving away from the formulation, we would also like to share with you what is possible in terms of dosing, multi-use containment, etc. So we have looked into prototypes of multi-dose containers, where there's a film, a longer stripe, a roll of our thin films in this container, and we can achieve a flexible dosing for patients, so they can individualize their own dosing, but we also can protect them for overdosing. So it's really with one container you can have either different doses or a multi-use for a certain period of time, for 1-2 weeks, and go away from the single individually packaged film to a multi-dose container would be possible. Of course, not all indications and all drugs this might regulatory-wise be possible, but depending on the products, mainly, for example, for OTCs, this might be an interesting opportunity to differentiate and position these products and to make it easier for the patients to use. So we are now at about 2/3 of our webinar, and we are going to ask now another poll question. May?
Excellent. Thank you, Marco. So the poll question is there an API within your company's portfolio which you could potentially consider for transmucosal delivery? Your 3 options are yes, no, or I don't know. To submit your answer, all you need to do is click on your desired option and press submit. And similarly, we'll take a look at the answers shortly. What about with this one, Marco? How do you feel this one will go?
Yeah, I think with the discussion with a lot of companies over the last years, we see a trend that it's not technology driven. It's like companies now are now looking for the APIs and how they can apply to the body and how they can leverage certain advantages. And then sooner or later they might come to the transmucosal oral delivery as well and to oral thin films. So it's a bit different than before, where products maybe have just been another oral dosage form in an OTC business. It's really more specified in the region now to position a drug with certain advantages. And I would like to know how the different companies are looking at it.
Excellent. So let's just take a look at the results.
So very good for us. So of course there's a lot of potential, I think, in the oral thin film area as compared to other oral dissolvable dosage forms, and yeah, might be an opportunity for us to follow up on this later on. So now let's go on with our webinar and talk about the commercial situation and the market. And the oral thin film market is still, I would say, a niche market if you only look at the films itself. So the global market consists of 20 products with around 8-9 APIs which are approved. Globally, it's in 2017, then you see the numbers on the left already, is in total about $1.8 billion. But it's really dominated by one major product, which is the Suboxone film, and I will come to that in a bit as well to go into a bit more details around that. Indications are beyond opioid dependency, are Alzheimer's, pain, erectile dysfunctions, and so on. And now I have some case studies, and within the case studies I would like to start with the just mentioned example Suboxone, which is the example in the industry, in the film industry, so to say, compared to other dosage, to other products in the field, is really dominating everything. It's approved in the indication for opioid dependency and has the two active substance buprenorphine in combination with naloxone. The objective to make this product was to have a film formulation as lifecycle management plan developed from Reckitt Benckiser for the portfolio of opioid dependence drugs. And the history is pretty interesting. The Suboxone sublingual film was launched in the US in the second half of 2010. In the same year, the patent of the already approved Suboxone tablets have been expired. About 2 years later, the sublingual film achieved 55% of the US market share. And in the same year, the tablets were discontinued, although already some generics have met the market at that time. But still, the oral thin film, and still today, is the most preferred dosage forms for the administration of this drug combination, buprenorphine and naloxone, in the US and in Australia. In the meanwhile, in the US, the first generics have been approved by the FDA, and we think that the market will see pretty soon the first generic competition coming, and so we will see how this market situation might change and maybe even evolve out of that situation. So looking at the sales of the Suboxone film, it's pretty impressive. And so these are numbers from the last 5 years until end of 2017, increasing up to $1.78 billion US dollar. We still see an increasing numbers the last 2 years, which somehow correlates with the opioid crisis in the United States, and would be very interesting to see how this goes on within the next years, especially in number of sales, of course, but also numbers of sold units. So I have 2 more case studies which are a bit more going into clinical data around oral thin films and how we were able to achieve the advantages which we think we can offer with the film formulation. So the first one is the achievement of a fast onset of action from moving from a tablet to a flash wafer, a faster disintegrating film. And in the curve, a PK profile of an API for an episodic treatment, you can see the plasma profile of the innovator tablet compared with several film formulations, especially the gray curve is highlighted here. These are different film formulations where we can achieve about the same Cmax like the innovator tablet. And looking at the data and the numbers, we see a similar Cmax, but a reduced Tmax. This was really the target, the aim of the project. But at the same time, the AUC of the tablet was lower to achieve the same the Cmax down to 55%. And this was also done because we had half the dose of the API. So the same API with half the dose, we're able to reduce the drug exposure and therefore possibly also the side effects which come along with this higher dosing. We achieved a faster rate of absorption and therefore a faster onset of action. And this was, especially in this indication, very important to get a short duration of action. So it's really for an episodic treatment, so fast in, fast out, to avoid potential side effects there. The second example I would like to share with you is, as mentioned before, the increase of bioavailability. And here we see the plasma profiles, the curves, where we compare a tablet, already a commercial tablet, with two OTF formulations. And the first one was just a lingual film with the same dose of the oil thin film. This is the light green curve. And it was just lingually applied and swallowed normally in this clinical setup. The second formulation had a reduced dose, only 30% of the tablet, and it was applied sublingually, but the patients or the subject were not allowed to swallow for a certain time, which is pretty difficult to do, especially if you're told not to swallow. I think for patients this is pretty complicated, but in general you see where the trend is going to. And so let's then have a look at the results. So when we administer the tablet with 5 milligrams, this was used as a reference product, the gray curve. And the lingual OTF with the same dose already showed an increase of the AUC bioavailability by about 80%. But then moving from the lingual application to the sublingual application with the lower dose, only 1.5 milligrams have been administered. The AUC, of course, goes down to 80% of the reference. But if you adjust this AUC to the applied dose, we're ending up with a bioavailability or an AUC which is about 230% of the reference. So you can see we can improve the bioavailability for an OTF by the lingual application, but even more, the superior absorption of the sublingual application would also be shown, where so the dose could be significantly reduced. So at the end of our webinar, let me quickly summarize the advantages of our thin films and what is the opportunities to go through the transmucosal drug delivery. So really, it's a proven option to improve bioavailability. We can avoid first pass effects and definitely achieve a faster onset of action, as you see in the case study before. So it's really both a real but also a perceived faster onset. And also the option to modulate PK profiles we're looking at in several projects right now, so where we can achieve what really is best for the indication and for the therapy we needed. So at the end, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will hand back to Jenna May.
Thank you, Marco. So just a reminder to the audience, in order to ask any questions, all you need to do is send them in via the questions widget. Just type them into the box at the top left-hand corner of your screen and click submit. So we'll kick off, Marco, with the first question, and that is, what about the content uniformity of the particle-loaded foam OTFs?
That's a good one. So somebody knows all thin films. Now, it's very important. I mean, this is a general thing we're looking at with all our dosage forms, and that's something we are controlling in the mass preparation step. So to say, you have to control this to achieve a homogeneous mixtures, to introduce the right process controls. This is nothing really problematic. It's just to apply the right controls, right mixing vessels for that. Basically daily business. Of course, if the particles are too large, so if they're really not lower micron particles, they anyway would cause problems during the coating, and so we're trying to have a loading of particles which are not too big, not too large. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you for that detailed answer. And the next question is, what are the advantages compared to sprays?
Good question. We think the spray always comes with certain autoregulatory instability problems. So it's still, the API has to be in a liquid dosage forms very often, and so it can have problems in stability. But also, it's a combination product, so it's regulatory-wise, you go through much more hurdles. You think it's easier to handle because it's a multi-use containment, but I think it's also compared to our thin films, it's a bit different way of application. In general, the delivery route is pretty much the same, but also in terms of loading, I think the sprays have some limitations. So especially the Meltaway films, they can achieve a higher drug loading from our perspective.
Excellent. The next question is, what type of molecules can resist the manufacturing process?
Yeah, and I think the question, as I interpret it, is in terms of chemical stability during the manufacturing process. I think we have our ways to handle the majority of small molecules, I would say. This is something which is, as far as I know, something we have to look at, but everything is manageable the way we are processing it. It's the temperature impact during the coating is really limited, so you would be surprised well, that is pretty low at the end of the day. Mainly if you go to biologicals, put them in all thin films, this might be a challenge. We also have solutions for that, but this is beyond the standard process, I would say.
Thank you. The next question is, what kind of taste masking strategy do you follow to mask the bitter taste?
In general, in literature, there are several ways of doing that. As I mentioned in the webinar, we can use ion exchange resins. This is pretty well known. We can work a lot with flavors, but this is really a challenging approach and each time has to be individually tested whether the taste masking approach you're looking at is really doing the right way. Especially bitter taste, very dominant bitter taste is a real challenge. I can't go into too many details because we have some, I would say, proprietary concepts around that, which I cannot share in the webinar, but we can easily follow up on this.
Perfect. So just a reminder to the audience, you can still submit questions via the Q&A widget. All you need to do is type in your question and click submit. So the next question is, which is the average drug loading?
I think looking back in the all thin films which have been commercialized, they're in the range of, I would say, 20 to 30 milligrams drug loading. We are pushing the boundaries a bit higher than that. I think, depending on the API, depending on the type of OTF, I would say the range 50 to 100 milligrams be the upper limit, not the typical one. Typically, you try to be lower, of course, if possible.
Great. And the next question is, what kind of packaging materials are recommended for OFT?
So the primary packaging material which is used is usually a laminate, comprised out of an outer layer, which is just mainly for stability, for mechanical stability and for printing purposes, but also, for example, if there's some child-proof properties are needed. Most of the packaging materials which are used in the all thin films, they have aluminum layers. You can see in the products on the market to prevent any moisture or oxygen being transferred into the pouch. And very important, most important is the inner layer, and there's where the trick is starting. And especially since one of the products, which is Barrix, which was very nicely used in the area of all thin films as well, is not being commercially available. So I think we have our alternatives. We know what we're doing in the inner part, which has product contact, but also this is, at the end of the day, a proprietary information.
Excellent. And the next question is, we have an intranasal product in development. Would it be possible to switch to an oral film?
Definitely. Since the intranasal product is also looking at the transmucosal uptake, especially if you look at small molecules. Depending on the volume and the dose, it's pretty straightforward to go to an oral thin films, especially having a sublingual application which has the highest bioavailability and the fastest onset. That could be straightforward, of course.
Perfect. Another reminder to the audience, you can still submit your questions via the Q&A widget. All you need to do is submit them via the Q&A widget, type it in and press send. So the next question is, why do you think OTF have not been a broad commercial success yet?
I think in the 2000s, several products have been in the OTC market. So it's just another dosage forms on the shelves in the US and Walgreens compared with other tablets, syrups. So, and this is a pretty competitive market. So basically kind of burned the oral thin films and the opportunities, because most of these drugs, or these dosage forms, were just bioequivalent to other oral tablets and syrups. So really they didn't pay out the advantages. So maybe the only product really having this major success is Suboxone, having the really sublingual high bioavailability, and by that, and also due to the advantage from the compliance perspective, because once the film is in, the patients cannot spit it out anymore compared to tablets. I think that was one of the triggers. But overall, there's no global product on the market yet, which is sold at least in the three major markets, US, Europe, and Japan. And I can only say we're working on that.
Brilliant. Our next question is, when can we have updates about technology of OTF for biosimilars or biologicals?
I think I don't know if you look at classical drug delivery, because there are certain limitations for the delivery of biologicals through the oral mucosa. So I would be happy to give you an update on this soon, but I think this is pretty challenging. That's all I can say right now.
Thanks for that. The next question is, can you compare oral thin films with other oral dissolvable tablets?
Yes, we can. And I think there's where we have some advantages with the oral thin films. I mean, compared to tablets out there in the market, also nice formulation, nice products, but they come with certain disadvantages. If you're looking at just a sublingual tablet, I think the film itself is already addressing a larger surface area of the oral mucosa. So, but just by the spreading, we can already achieve a higher bioavailability just with the same dose with a very similar film. This is already one advantage. If you compare to the oral thin films with a lyophilized tablets, for example, which are also very commonly used in this field, as you have seen in the webinar, the stability, especially from the foam wafers, are a significant advantage. The lyophilized tablets coming in this thick aluminum trays, they comprise with one key disadvantage: they are very brittle. They're not surviving on hard handling of the product. This is really an advantage of the oral thin films on that. So these are the two main factors I can think of.
Great. The next question is there any temperature limitation for OTF, for example, for zone IVA and zone IVB?
So, no, in general, no, because these products are, so in this zone 4 conditions, these products are tightly sealed in the pouches, so there would be, the moisture impact would be really limited due to the primary packaging, and the temperature is really depending on the API stability, but since it's still a kind of solid dosage forms, very often stability are pretty similar to those tablets. So you see definitely there's no general limitation to go into that, especially with the foam OTFs, which I have presented to you, different humidity levels, even very dry or very high, would less of a problem after opening the pouch until the patient is taken the medication.
Perfect. The next question is, are one of your multi-use containers on the market, even for OTC?
Easy answer, no. Unfortunately, not yet.
Okay. Then the next question is, what are the limitations for OTF?
In what respect the limitation? Of course, there's a dose limitation. This comes along just with the character of a thin film. So above a certain API content, simply it cannot be achieved because it would be thick film, basically, which would look like say a flat tablet. So this is the limitation. But in general, if you're looking at a relatively fast PK profile within less than an hour or two, there's only a few limitations. If you're looking at a constant drug delivery over like a controlled release tablet or very slow release for 24 hours, I think that's a different application and not would be also a kind of limit for an OTF, and maybe not the way we would look at, because this is really a trans-oral mucosal uptake primarily and not through the GI tract.
Perfect. So you can still submit questions. Feel free to send them in via the Q&A widget. Our next question is, could you develop a cannabis OTF instead of an oral spray?
General answer, yes, why not? And this is the same concept, trans-oral mucosal uptake. You can also put it in the film. I think generally this is possible.
Brilliant. That was an easy answer. The next is, do repeated applications of oral films lead to any irritation on the oral mucosa?
I think this is mainly API driven. We have not seen any problems on that based on formulations. This is really depending on the API. Of course, if you're using an irritant API, this could cause skin irritation also in the oral mucosa and has to be tested up front.
Brilliant. The next question is, would you ever need a device to deliver your films to the target site, for example, inside the cheek?
I think from our perspective, we never looked at it that way, because it should be for the patient an easy way to handle it. And as I mentioned before, the foam OTFs has a much easier way of handling it. So to take it in your hand or in the gloves for caregivers and apply it into the oral cavity, it's something which is very common for patients to do. I think what's a bit more difficult is maybe the oral patches, to apply it with the right side to the oral cavity. One could think of an applicator, but I think most patients prefer to have their own finger as applicator and not just something foreign as well. I mean, we can think about that, and maybe you have an idea and can share it with us how we can improve that. Sure.
Your next question is, does the API require special particle size distribution?
In general answer, yes. Of course, if you have a thin film and you're with films below 100 or 150 micrometers, your particles should not be as huge, so they're basically standing out. I think with the foam OTF there, we have much more flexibility on using different particle sizes. With the thin films, I would say the API should be micronized. Normal thin films based on, I don't know, HPMCs or so.
The next question is, does the OTF have a good acceptance by elderly patients?
As far as I know, yes. And this is, I think, one of the advantages. If you have difficulties to swallow, it's much easier just to apply it lingually or buccally, and you don't have to swallow another tablet on top. I think this is the main driver, since elderly patients are very often under multiple therapies, multiple dosages, drugs. Could be an advantage, definitely. Yeah.
Brilliant. So that looks like it's all we have time for today. So that just leaves me to thank you, Marco, for what was an excellent presentation, and also LTS for sponsoring the session. To all the attendees, you'll receive an email shortly telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access it through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please do keep an eye out on the website just mentioned, and feel free to follow us on Twitter at BRWebinars for daily updates, and join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. Thank you all once again, and I hope you have a lovely day.